How the digital divide impacts young India's vaccination chances. The CoWIN portal, which was opened up for registration for the 18 to 44 age group on May 1, has come under the scanner for its potential to exclude those on the other side of the digital divide, given that registration is mandatory. Hearing a suo moto case recently, the Supreme Court asked the government to wake up and smell the coffee, stressing a digital divide causing unequal access to COVID 19 vaccines in India. The CoWIN portal, which was open for registration for the 18 to 44 age group on May 1, has come under the scanner for its potential to exclude those on the other side of the digital divide, given that registration is mandatory. How wide is the digital divide? In the Lokaniti CSDS National Election Study 2019, only 1 in every 3 were found to be using smartphone. Approximately 90% of the smartphone users had internet in their phones, and merely 16% and 10% household had access to computer, laptop, and an internet connection at home, respectively. Even though 18 to 44-year-old were more likely to own smartphones, nearly half the proportion is still dismal, with the majority of the chunk likely to get the jab later than their privileged counterparts. In 2014, 24% Indians and 35% among 18 to 44s owned smartphones. Going by our recent data of late 2020s and early 2021, in 5 states that went to polls most recently, Bihar, Assam, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala, smartphone users have grown by 12% from 33% in 2019 to 45% in 2020-21. Among 18 to 44, this proportion improved from 47 to 56%. Since we also find that these 5 states taken together mirror the national average for smartphone ownership both in 2017 and 19, we assume a similar growth nationally as well. This would mean that a majority of the population in India still finds itself at the wrong side of the digital divide. Who all stand at the risk of exclusion? Unsurprisingly, the urban, the rich, the upper caste, the rich, the educated, and men are more likely to own internet enabled smartphones, while the rest stand at risk of exclusion from accessing vaccines. Women, for instance, are far less likely to own smartphones, with a gap of 22 percentage points among 18 to 44s. Further, the digital divide accentuates through caste and class. The rich 18 to 44 are 3 times more likely than the poor, while the upper caste are more than 1.5 times like the SC/STs to have a smartphone. What's more, even among those between 18 to 44, the divide is quite significant, with the youngest chunk of 18 to 25 twice as likely to own a smartphone as 36 to 44. Backing up the Supreme Court's observation, the data highlights the far-fetchedness of an illiterate villager from rural India crossing the digital divide to register COVID 19 vaccines on the CoWIN portal. Among 18 to 44, merely 8% of non-literate, 17% of those who studied up to primary, and 40% of those educated by matric own smartphones, as against 3 in 4, 74% of college educated. The urban-rural divide too is colossal, as highlighted in Table 1, with more than 3/5 of the 18 to 44 urban population owning smartphones, as against less than 2/5 in the rural spaces. Even among urban dwellers, 72% of 18 to 44s in cities own smartphones, as against 56% in towns. With the second wave of COVID 19 spreading into the interiors, which had largely remained unaffected during the first wave, the rural urban asymmetry in the vaccination coverage needs to be assessed. Does the digital divide cut across states? Table 2 shows a state-wise comparison of smartphone users in the 18 to 44 age group with the proportion of those vaccinated with at least one dose as June 1, exactly a month since the inclusion of this age group of the 9 states that stand below the national average of smartphone users, 7 also fall behind the nationwide average of 18% who got the first jab. Further, the 10 states with the highest proportion of smartphone users, 7 also feature among the top performing states with regard to the administration of the first jab during the first month. Simply put, the lower the proportion of smartphone users in a state, lower the chances of getting a jab and vice versa. However, it must be emphasized that there are several other factors impacting the chances, including the availability of vaccine in a state. As you read this, a sizable population struggles to get a shot at the life-saving vaccine, some in the absence of internet-enabled smartphones, some due to ignorance of registration process, some are not knowing the only language English the portal is available in, and the rest is navigating through the complex multi-step journey on the portal for freezing a slot despite having the means. Thank you.